Building a computer is no rocket science and everyone could do that. But not everyone would be crazy enough to build a custom case from scratch. Well, I'm not like everyone, and when my parents complained about their old computer, I volunteered to help them out. A system for playing solitaire, browsing Facebook and making Skype calls doesn't have to be very powerful, but I still want it to be upgradable. Thus, all Nook-like solutions were not taken under consideration. The smallest socketed platform, Mini ITX, is still quite pricey, thus I settled for the good old Mini ITX. Minimizing the footprint required using an SFX power supply which doesn't have to be very powerful, but must be of high quality. A 300 watts be quiet unit should do. Dual-core Intel Pentium G30-50 CPU will sit on an MSI motherboard and will be cooled by a stock intercooler. 8 GB of RAM and 120 GB SSD drive will complete the picture. With all of the components figured out, I started planning the enclosure. I came up with a small cube with the main frame made of a square aluminum pipe. The facade will be made of aluminum bars 2 and 3 cm wide and will be diversified with pieces of pine wood. Let's get started. First, the components frame, which dimensions are determined by the size of the Mini ITX motherboard. I established the middle of the pipe and made 2 markings at 8.5 cm from there. To make a 90 degrees bend, you have to extract a triangular piece of aluminum. I used Dremel to make first cut. The cut was very clean, but it took me way too long to make it to continue like that, thus I used a metal saw to do the rest of the cutting. Making the bend is a matter of gently forming the material while pressing it against the table. 2 other bends, which determine the frame's capacity, were made similarly 18 cm down the pipe. Remember to shape the aluminum symmetrically to make a construction capable of standing on its own after fixing all the components onto it. The width of the case is determined by the size of the power supply and the CPU cooler. I figured that 6.5 cm will be enough, so I made marks on both ends of the pipe and made 2 final bends. To mount the motherboard, I used a set of M3 threaded inserts. I placed the motherboard on the frame and marked the mounting points. To fix a threaded insert, you drill a hole, screw the insert onto a riveter, put it in the hole and squeeze the riveter, but not too hard. Next on the line was sorting out the power supply mounting points. I made the mounting bracket by cutting a piece of an angle bar the same length as the SFX power supply. I attached the bracket to the frame using 2 rivets and drew 2 holes for the power supply mounting screws. On the opposite side, I drilled 2 more holes for the 2.5-inch SSD drive. Next stage was making the cover. Its footprint measures 18 cm by 15 cm and is determined by 2 angle bars. Fabricating both ending elements required making 2 90 degrees bends. The drill is pretty much the same. Extract a triangular piece of aluminum, file the edges, and form the material. Vertical elements are 20 cm long pieces of flat aluminum bar. In the final design, 5 pieces are 3 cm and 6 pieces are 2 cm wide. The wider ones were attached using 2 rivets on each side to ensure sturdiness of the entire assembly. Left and right sides are symmetrical, so I could run pieces of aluminum across the top for aesthetical consistency. 10 rivets later, I could attach the bottom piece of the assembly. The resulting construction was very sturdy, so to attach the smaller pieces, I used only 2 rivets for each instead of 4. To further strengthen the cage, I fixed a piece of angle bar at the top and a flat bar on the bottom. initial fitting revealed an engineering flaw. When making the cage, I didn't take into account the rivets that protrude about 5 mm all around the bottom fixing. I didn't have time to start all over again, so I addressed this issue by breaking off the bottom pieces of the frame. I decided to connect the frame and the cage with 2 M3 screws, which required fixing 2 rivets in the square pipe of the frame. After making mounting points, I drilled 2 4 mm holes, dropped inserts, and drilled 2 holes in the bottom bracket of the cage for the mounting screws. Next, fix some pieces of wood to give the case some warmth and cover the rivets. For that, I used some cheap construction wood, 2 and 3 cm wide and 1 cm thick. I used angle saw to cut a bunch of pieces of a different length. I didn't really stick to the design when fabricating this, just went freehand on it and made them in pairs for each piece of the aluminum. Some of the top ones were cut at 45 degrees to make a clean connection between 2 wooden elements. I fixed the wood onto the aluminum bars using strong glue. The last part was to fill the void between the vertical elements of the cage. I had some tulle material lying around that my wife bought for her wedding skirt. I cut it and glued it in using the same glue, as I didn't have any better adhesive for this job. Given the amount of construction work, assembling the computer was the icing on the cake. I attached the motherboard to the frame using a set of 4 screws and standoffs that I made from an aluminum pipe. Next in line was the hard drive, which is held in place by 2 screws. The same amount of screws was used to fix the power supply unit. The 24-pin ITX power cable and the 4-pin auxiliary CPU power cable ran around the bottom edge of the motherboard. After connecting the SSD drive, the very last thing left that needed addressing was the power button. I solved it by making a short cable with a 2-pin connector on one end and a momentary switch on the other. Glue it to the frame so it can be easily located through the material. I carefully put the whole assembly inside the cage, turn the contraption upside down, screw in 2 screws and attach 4 rubber feet. And that's how the prime element came to life. Despite the open board design, the computer is very quiet. Thanks to unrestricted access to air, the fans can spin really slow even under 50% load. The execution lacks some precision here and there, but I think the overall result is quite remarkable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.